clear that I'm not the tech director of this. We'll fix it. Again, I really appreciate if we could get the lights back in the hall, the fact that the 5 speakers have come at this question in a substantive way and all from their own directions, and to start the exchange where I'd like to ask the speakers to each spend a couple of minutes responding to anything else that was said, or if you want to deepen something that you were thinking about or extend a point. We'll take some comments from the speakers, and then we will be doing questions from the audience. And just a note on this is an opening of a conversation. It is obviously not definitive in several hours, but it is the beginning of something we feel is very important. And we do want to hear what you think. Questions are welcome. We will not necessarily answer every question in order, but this will all feed into the conversation. So Sinan, since you began first, would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you. You know, since the 19th century, there's something in the Western psyche called Orientalism. Albert Sari wrote about it. It's this obsession with the East, the Orient, and making the Orient into a monolith, and thinking of it in a very abstract, problematic way. And it's amazing how resilient this discourse is in the minds of a lot of people, and I'm afraid it even infects the minds of some people who are anti-imperialist or anti-against the status quo. And once again, you know, making the equivalence between Islamism and imperialism is like speaking of a tank and a knife, and I'm being very generous here. And, you know, fundamentalism is not backward. It's a very modern phenomenon. Fundamentalisms of all kinds are very modern phenomena. And even though in their discourse they talk about going back to the 12th century, it's all about the current phase. So this obsession continues, and this kind of visionary approach to the Middle East and elsewhere continues. And of course, as I said again, we should not be repeating this dichotomy that was already there, but that the Bush administration put into place to make this equivalence. You know, there is patriarchy all over the world, and of course there are different forms of violence, but there is as much and maybe even more violence against women here in this country. And there is homophobia in this country as well. And gay men are dragged by pickup trucks, and you know all the stories. But we tend to assume our highest form of alertness when it comes to issues that happen over there. And then Islamism also, you know, there is a large spectrum in terms of these movements. And once again, I am speaking as an atheist. There is a large spectrum in these movements, and there are Islamists of all different kinds. There are people in the Arab world who are Marxists but happen to be privately believers. And Islamism is part of modernization. So one reason, this has been the huge debate in the Arab world, why did it work this time when they've been trying to do it for 50 years? You know, and some of the Marxists who were active organizers in Egypt and elsewhere realized that one mistake of the older generations was to speak at people as opposed to speaking to people. So once the Marxists, as you said in a way, started to reach out and speak with others and work in coalitions and make compromises, things started to work. And one last thing, it's really unacceptable to put Nasser and Gaddafi together in the same box. Nasser built a modern society and stood up to the West and was a genuine anti-imperialist with all of this problem. Gaddafi destroyed the society and squandered billions of dollars and resold all of Libyan oil to the West. So really, I don't think we should now, again, make an equivalence between Nasser, who died penniless, and Gaddafi, whose son spent $4 million to have Mariah Carey sing at the party. So, once again, I don't find myself usually defending Nasser or defending Islamism or whatever, but you put me in that situation.
Well, I first want to say I'm glad that I put you in that situation if that's the case, because I think that's quite revelatory. I certainly was not equating Gaddafi and Nasser, and I fear that the points that I making about imperialism might be a little bit, like, lend themselves to some mischaracterization. First of all, I do want to differentiate myself from maybe the other panelists insofar as I don't want to simply leave with the idea that I think that fundamentalism or Islamism, political Islam, what have you, is a product of imperialism. I think it has been pretty clear that my point here is to problematize the category of imperialism and anti-imperialism in a historical moment. There are constraints that are placed upon the left today that are historical, and I just want to kind of reassert that that's what I intended to do with the paper I gave. But what if the moment in history in the 50s and 60s did already reveal certain limitations, and that would suggest that Gaddafi and Nasser, of course, were not on par with one another, and they were two different people. Gaddafi did look up to Nasser before the sort of split with Egypt, but the ideals that were working in the Arab world can look progressive to us. Why does modernization seem progressive to us? Why does Nasser seem progressive to us? And why does he allow us to even go so far as to maybe think that the Islamists are acceptable, as you said at the end? I want to just, the thing I want to emphasize is the constraints that we face in the way that we conceive of politics today, and politics yesterday as well, are real and they're concrete, and that I don't think that anti-imperialism is adequate to the very desires that we're all professing here, which is to go beyond a framework of Islamism or anti-imperialism. And it strikes me that the term left has been thrown in here and there, but the point that the left could, in fact, be amenable to Islamist politics, which are out against their interests, is profound to me. And the fact that it is easy to slide back into that with the slip of the tongue is just as profound.
Sansara.
Okay, well, I want to first thoroughly unite with the frustrations that were expressed, particularly from people who came to this country and are upset by the lack of opposition and resistance to the crimes of empire as it's raining death and destruction around the world, and particularly the youth and the students. It's actually a very important thing that people hear that and spread that. So I want to say that very profoundly. I also want to speak directly to this question of why put U.S. empire, U.S. imperialism together with Islamic fundamentalism in a dialogue, and it's not to equate them. I have the analogy of a tank to a knife, and that's being generous, is quite accurate. In terms of global scale, it's the U.S. that dropped nuclear bombs on two civilian populations. It was the U.S. that, was founded in slavery and genocide, and there's over 100 foreign occupations, CIA-backed coups, and acts of military aggression. I have, no differentiation in terms of scale or scope of crime and criminality. The reason I think it's important, actually, to put the two together in a dialogue is that for masses of oppressed humanity, particularly in the Middle East and in the Arab world, so to speak, Islamic fundamentalism is actually gaining traction. Yes, instigated in large part and fueled and funded by U.S. imperialist forces, and yes, driven by the wars of aggression, and as well as the capitalist and imperialist development and mass dislocations and immiseration caused. But it is not a way out. And frankly, I'm not raising it because of the specter of terrorist attacks in the mall. I'm raising it because it compounds people's misery. And it actually, instead of reaching and finding a way out, and there is a way out, it retrenches, and it is actually the forces of Islamic fundamentalism, the leading forces are historically outmoded strata who are being, you know, warlords, clerics, and feudal forces who are oppressors being dislocated by imperialist development. The people who are being caught up in it are suffering dually from this imperialist aggression and imperialist development and these backwards relations that are being reinforced. And there is a way out. That's why I think it's important. And you know, there's a BBC, this is a point Avakian has drawn a number of times. There was a BBC reporter who was talking a few years ago after the London bombing of the train system, supposed fundamentalist bombing, and he made the point, this BBC reporter, you know, a generation ago, these people, these youth, would have all been Maoists. And to be clear, Maoists would not have been bombing train stations or civilian populations. But the notion that a generation ago, all over the world, people looked to the revolutionary struggle in China when it was genuinely revolutionary. The Red Book outsold the Bible, that people actually thought liberation and revolution was real in this life and were fighting for it. And that has largely been because that revolution was defeated and reversed and has been slandered. And the communists in large parts of the world have been massacred and imprisoned and tortured. And then there's been a dividing out within the communist movement itself as it's lost its bearings in large part, but it's also trying to regroup. And that's the significance of Avakian's new synthesis. But there are masses of humanity who once had a way out and were fighting for it, who are now locked in between in these two reactionary outmoded forces, which are not equal in par, but Islamic fundamentalism and US imperialism are grinding up humanity. And frankly, one of the reasons, I'll stop with this, I wanted to speak to imperialism, but maybe I'll come back to that, because I had a difference with Laura on this, but I'll come back to that, but I'll end with this. One of the reasons, frankly, why I think there is less resistance in this country than there was, say, during the Vietnam War, is because during the Vietnam War, it was very easy. Well, it wasn't very easy, but it was much more possible to look at the struggle of the Vietnamese people and say that was a righteous liberation struggle. And to identify with the resistance there and to actually say, you know, there was a chance, hoping that the NLF would win among the anti-war movements. Here it is very much more difficult to look out in the world, and as much as people are horrified, and frankly they ought to be more horrified and more acting against, but as much as people are horrified by the acts and the crimes of the US government, they don't see anything else out there to support. And that's what we have to bring forward. There are secular forces, there are revolutionary forces, but we actually have to support them. We have to make it more known, and that's what I'm advocating for.
That would be Greg next. Okay. Welcome.